Hi, good evening, and welcome to the Jule Smith Museum of Fine Art at Auburn University. I'm Alex Dudley. I'm a student guide here at the museum. I'm also a junior studying graphic design. Tonight it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to a conversation with Kate Medley. Kate Medley is a North Carolina-based journalist documenting the American South, primarily working as a photojournalist covering the national news across the American South. Kate's work focuses on storytelling and environmental portraiture, often exploring issues of social justice and the shifting politics of the region. Her roots are in Mississippi, where she has investigated civil rights era cold cases, covered devastating impacts of Hurricane Katrina, and the cultural relevance of hot tamales and culicles in the Mississippi Delta. Kate Medley was the Jule's artist in residence for the museum's annual Auburn Studio Project, a yearly collaboration with the city of Auburn that serves 7th grade students at East Sanford School. Over the course of the year, Kate shared her work and practice with students at East Sanford School, as well as the broader Auburn community. Her current exhibition, Thank You, Please Come Again, served as inspiration for a community response exhibit currently up at the museum, as well as an exhibit for the East Sanford students of photography, currently on display at the Jane Dempsey Art Center. After her presentation, Kate will be joined in conversation with Dr. Joan Harrell, Director of Strategic Initiatives and Programs in the College of Liberal Arts at the university, and her lecturer in the School of Communication and Journalism. Dr. Harrell teaches journalism courses that engage emerging journalists and communication professionals on how to utilize intentional listening through research and informative interviews to write compelling stories and opinion editorials for multimedia platforms. Central to Dr. Harrell's scholarship and public engagement is working with and centering community voices. Recent works have covered descendants of the historic slave ship Clotilda, women of faith community leaders, children living in food deserts, and historic sacred places of the South. After Kate and Dr. Harrell's conversation, there will be books available for purchase in the museum store and a book signing in the cafe. And now please join me in welcoming Kate Medley.
Thank you, Alex. That was great. No reason to be nervous. Thank you all for coming. As Alex mentioned, I've been involved with the Auburn Studio Project in this past year, and that in some ways culminated with tonight, both having you all here, but also we just left a reception for the middle schoolers who had their gallery opening. And if you haven't hung out with 157th graders hyped up on cookies, that opportunity is I think still going on across town. But you guys seem, in contrast, very, very chill. So let's do this. First, I really just want to thank the whole team at the Jule, who I've had the honor of getting to know in this past year. Specifically Christy Barlow, who's in the back, who I think dreamed up my role in this Auburn Studio Project, but then also Chris and Jessica, so many of you here, Tiffany, who helped with the program tonight. It's really been a great team effort, and I'm so honored that I'm going to be in conversation with Joan, a little bit nervous, but mostly honored to be in conversation with Joan after this. So a little bit of, let's see, Mike, am I sounding okay? Do I need to adjust anything before I get started? Good, okay. So as Alex mentioned, I work as a photojournalist. I have been doing that for about 20 years now. This is a picture of me in the field doing that work by another esteemed photojournalist, Roy Doyle, who's a good friend of mine. He works out of the Mississippi Delta. So I grew up in Mississippi, in Jackson, Mississippi, and took my first photography class there the summer after my senior year in college at Millsaps College. Sorry, the summer after my senior year in high school. And that summer I got a glimpse of, by way of this color slide class, a glimpse of what it's like to venture out into the world, into your own community, your surrounding communities, other people's communities, to document those spaces, to talk with people you've never met before and ask them to collaborate with you on making an image. I really caught the bug that summer. I went to journalism school in Montana and studied photojournalism. I worked for newspapers first in Montana and then moved back to the South by way of newspaper jobs. So I continue to do this work covering national news in the South, primarily for the Washington Post, the New York Times, NPR, Wall Street Journal. I'll click through just some of it here. I'm based in North Carolina, and so last year, as you could probably imagine, was very heavy in political coverage, being in a swing state. I went to a lot of Trump rallies. I went to a lot of Kamala Harris rallies. I work independently. I have relationships with editors at these newspapers and magazines, and they call and say, you know, the Amazon distribution center in North Carolina is trying to unionize. Can you be there tomorrow for a demonstration of that effort? And so that's kind of how that works. This is a story that I pitched to the New York Times in Mississippi about a tradition called pilgrimage, which may happen in some towns in Alabama as well, where the premise of a pilgrimage is that it's really a tourism effort to bring people to the town, and they showcase the antebellum houses. This one is in Columbus, Mississippi, where I wanted to check in 2024, this was, to see how a program like pilgrimage is landing in 2024. So post the upheaval of 2020 and Black Lives Matter, are in places in the Deep South, are we still telling stories about our history that are just black and white? Or as in a place like Columbus, they're having conversations, really difficult conversations about how do we tell our community history. There's a group that's saying, if we go forward with having something like pilgrimage, well, we also need to talk about, the Chinese Americans in Columbus, and we also need to talk about, the Jewish communities of Columbus. And so we worked on this story there over the course of a few days that really tried to, paint more broadly what do these conversations around the South and really around the country look like. And so, a lot of this work, as some of these examples demonstrate, it's hard-hitting news. It's often about issues of injustice and inequality, and I'm often not showing up to people's houses on their best day. We're having hard conversations about the news of the world and how that's affecting them personally. And it can be really hard work. It can be heavy work, but I really enjoy having the opportunity to get to know the people in our communities and try to understand their story well enough and represent their story honestly enough to a national audience to tell, a broader story about the South. So along the way in my journey as a photojournalist, I started stopping at gas stations. Oftentimes, this was to fill up my car or to get a lunch bite or just because I was curious. I often found myself, covering this hard-hitting news and leaving, someone's home where I'd been photographing them and trying to process what, that conversation was like. And I think in retrospect, I was sort of buoyed by, some of these stops at, like a hole in the wall gas station in that community where I could go inside and take the pulse of what's going on here, who's eating here, who's cooking at the grill, what's on the menu, what's on the community bulletin board. When I got hungry for lunch, if my options were the local Burger King or the local gas station grill, as a journalist, as a reporter, I found that I could learn a lot more about where in the world I was by way of stopping into that gas station. So I did that, kind of, this project started as me just, stopping in between on my way to another place, often, to another reporting project. So I'll read a short excerpt from the book. I should mention, so I wrote the introduction to the book, but before you get to the introduction, there's an essay by my friend Kiese Lehman, who I think is one of the most brilliant thinkers about the South, the contemporary South. And he also happens to be from my hometown of Jackson, Mississippi. And if you only see one thing in this book, I hope it'll be Kiese's essay. But I will read briefly from my introduction. 10 miles or so past the last stoplight in Hillsborough, North Carolina, a panoply of hand-painted signs dotted the roadside for the farm and garden. Vegetables, jelly, live plants, local lamb, beer, bait. So I pulled off to gas up and was greeted by a shop dog named Parker, alongside the promised vegetables, bait, and beer. Inside, an older Black woman donned a plastic hair covering in case of rain. A young Latinx couple purchased last-minute party provisions. 2 white farmers seemingly shopped only for conversation. Peach hand pies, Bojangle biscuits pirated from an in-town location, and organic beef came home with me that day in 2008. 4 years later, I began documenting gas stations across the South, interviewing and photographing the people who run the shops, cook the food, and buy the goods. There is an egalitarian nature to the gas station, integral to the lives of people in every socioeconomic bracket if you live in the South, especially in rural areas. Working as a photojournalist, it became my way of studying this complex region, the people who live here, and how the populations and priorities are shifting. New Yorkers have bodega culture. In the South, we have gas stations.
Yeah, rough day, huh? Been slow or what? Hey, throw some jalapenos on there for me. Please, darling, thank you. I got 6 weeks. You can sit out there. I'm going to get out there. Right? Oh, you can get it. Put it up. Okay. Yeah. They go like that. You know, I'm going to go go. Damn, put it up. Okay. Oh, how far? Come on.
Well, my help called in, day before, we go to work, and all planned out yesterday. What we're gonna do yesterday. Took a shower. Get like this lady back, she wake up till 3:30, you know, come on. That was the top of. Oversleep till 3:30.
So in 2013, I cashed in my vacation time in the name of gas station research, and I drove home to Mississippi. I posted a simple query online and said, what's the best gas station food in the Mississippi Delta? And I was flooded with responses. And it was not only a topic of shared enthusiasm, but people had very specific and conflicting opinions about it. It was not just, you gotta have fried chicken at the Double Quick. It was, you gotta have fried chicken at the Double Quick, but go to the Churton Street location in Clarksdale, not the Fulton Street location, because at Churton Street, that's where Miss Debbie cooks, and she's the best fry cook in the South. And you know, people would go on and on and on and on and on about their experiences in these places. So this is a map that I literally, you know, on the side of Highway 61, I'm on the hood of my rental car trying to sketch out a plan. It changed many times, but a number of these places I did get to. But anyway, you know, that enthusiasm that I received from that initial query, it was very telling to me about the space that these places, these people, the space that they take up in people's lives, how important they are to literally the livelihood of some of these, especially small communities. And, you know, on that note, I found when I would talk to people about the work that I was doing, often, you know, my journalism work, which again, you know, is sort of, you know, hard hitting in nature compared to this, I would, you know, be trying to sort of highlight the news heavy topics that I'd been researching or covering. And then we would get to the Q&A and people would be like, so tell me about that gas station food, or like, let's talk about fried chicken. People always wanted to come back to this work. And again, not necessarily because they always agreed with me, but because they, you know, they wanted to talk about it. It was something important to them. So these are just, you know, a few images from, I worked on this project on and off for 10 years, and documented, I say I documented 150 places, but it was certainly more than that by the end, across 11 states in the South. And in my research, I learned that the majority of gas stations in the South and in the nation are owned by immigrants. And so that became something of great import to me. And I think the story was to, you know, highlight this increasingly global South. This is a place called Calvander Food Mart, near where I live in North Carolina. It's right outside of Chapel Hill. And Calvander's is, you know, it looks like an old country store. It's in a rural area. It is owned by a couple named Manesh and Manisha Patel. They bought it in 2008. And they, in the beginning, kept the menu the same, which is, burgers and chicken tenders and livers and gizzards. And increasingly, they've folded in a number of the recipes from Manesh's family from his native India. And so now when you go to this place, you have your burgers and your fries and your tenders, but you also have, your veggie samosas. And on Tuesdays, they usually do a heavier Indian food menu. And in this specific part of Orange County, there's an increasingly Latino population. And so Manesh was telling me when I was last there that he's really shifted his grocery order to reflect offerings that his clientele have been asking for. And so now when you go into Calvander Food Mart, you pass by one cooler that has paletas in it, and then another cooler that has warm tortillas in it. And you see some like pinto beans on the menu, and some leanings into Latino foods that his clientele has been requesting. And it's places like Calvander's that I think are really the jewels of this work, because they are truly a reflection of the communities that they serve. So people sent me recommendations along the way. Again, like, you got to try the fried chicken from this fried cook in this town or whatever. And I have a spreadsheet that's like 300 entries long of these recommendations, which I'm super grateful for. But then there are also places like Buck's One Stop, I think it was, in Lottie, Louisiana, where, I'm on my way somewhere else, and I'm talking to my mother on the phone, and I'm all, I gotta go, and slam on the brakes and go to check in on Destiny McCrory, who is the daughter of the owners and also the fry cook. And so, most of these places that I stopped at, I just showed up. I tried this thing for a hot minute where I called in advance, and it was just a total flop. I would get somebody on the phone, and I would be like, my name's Kate Medley, and I live 3 states over, and I have this, hypothesis or this, theory about gas stations and their cultural relevance. And it's just like, hang on, as fast as I can. Like, I'm literally trying to check people out at the gas station. And so I went back to just showing up at these places and sort of stumbling through an explanation of my goals with the project to the cashier, who, if I was lucky, was the owner or knew the owner. And most were very gracious in letting me hang around and make some photographs over the course of the day. So last year I published this book called Thank You, Please Come Again, an exhibit of which is out front. And I'll just sort of close this part by saying that it can be a weird thing to drive around for 10 years documenting this thing that is of interest to you. And there was one point where I was gonna sign the contract to do this book, and I was talking to my mom about it. And let me just start by saying that my mom is like the most amazing person in the whole world. But she said, in the way that only a mother can say, well, that is a very niche topic. And I thought to myself, this might be a total flop. And to her point, it is a niche topic, but it's been really wonderful to see it resonate with, it's also a topic that literally all of you, can relate to on some level, because you've been to these places. It's a little harder, when I talk about this project outside of the South, and people's jaws drop when they see some of these photos. But like you guys get it because you've been to these places. And so it's been really wonderful to move this project out into the world and watch it resonate with such broad audiences. So I think I'll stop there. Let me just tell you about Fred Eaton real quick. I was going to read this thing about Fred, but we don't have time. So I'll just tell you about Fred, also because we're in Alabama. And so Fred Eaton is, he operates a service station in Pritchard, Alabama. It's called Fred Eaton Service Station. And he opened it in the 60s with his 7 siblings. And it remains to this day a full service cash only enterprise in this predominantly African-American community right outside of Mobile. And he doesn't sell food, but he will literally do just about anything else. He will, do all the services to your car. But this is also like the community hub of Pritchard. Let me just read this one quote. He told me, when people retire, they come sit around out front. Take the preacher, for instance. He's retired. He'll sit around and we'll talk church stuff. It's not real church, but it's a lot like real church, right here at my own service station. And yeah, it was just, he's a really wonderful man. Okay, Joan, you ready to do this? Okay, great.
So while my friend Kate comes forth, why don't you give her the So to say it is an honor to be with you, Kate, is an understatement. It's great to see you. Always wonderful to have you back.
Thank you, Joan.
In Auburn, Alabama,
Thank you.
the loveliest village on the plains.
Before you start, Joan, I just need to be real with the audience. So Joan and I met in the fall, and we learned that we have a mutual friend. That's Christiana. Hi. We learned that we have a mutual friend named Eduardo Medina, and Eduardo finished at Auburn a few years ago. He's a brilliant man, and he is now a reporter for the New York Times. And so Eduardo and I have gotten to know one another by way of doing that work for the New York Times. And so when the folks here at the museum said that Joan and I were going to be in conversation, I called Eduardo and I was like, this is going to happen next week. How do I prepare? How do I prepare for Joan? And let me start by saying, again, Eduardo is a brilliant man. And he said, oh, girl, all right, good luck. Joan is one of the smartest people I've ever met. And sometimes, I'm just gonna be real, she asks me questions and she starts talking about like the relationship with this and within the construct of this. And by the time she gets to end into the question, I think to myself, dang, I'm not smart enough for this. I don't even know, Joan. And so I might need y'all's help. I'm gonna do my best here.
I can't believe Eduardo did that to me. Okay. So just very quickly, Eduardo was one of the first students that I had the opportunity to teach. Eduardo graduated from Auburn University four years ago. I'm saying that for a reason. He was the editor of the Auburn Plainsman for students out there. And today, where is Eduardo? He is a reporter for the New York Times.
And he gives Joan great credit.
But he's a brilliant young man. So I'm saying that to the students, which some of them have already heard, and Eduardo was with us last fall semester, I think. So yes, but it's an honor to be with you. And with that said, I want to start out by saying, I would like for everyone, if you have not seen the book, hopefully you will also purchase it, but I'm putting emphasis here. A photographic road trip. Thank you, please. Come again. How gas stations feed and fuel the American South. So I took the time, and in honor of Eduardo, I looked up the linguistic history of thank you, and it evolved from I will remember what you have done for me. I will remember what you have done for me. So just think about that for a moment and your experience of being intentional, traveling in the South, and looking at the intentionality of gas stations and food, immigration, the history of segregation and food, the intersectionality of religion. Mr. Pritchard, who I'm aware of because he's near Africatown,
Yeah.
which perhaps maybe he's a descendant of the Clotilda, of the last slave ship that was discovered in 1860, and people are still working on the project. So thank you. I will remember what you have done for me. What did this project do for you?
Whew, yeah. What didn't it do for me? I want to speak, thank you for that. I want to speak to the title for a minute. So I worked with a creative director for the Bitter Southerner. He was the creative director for this project, or for this book. And he came up with a title. And at first I wasn't quite sure. And I I understood sort of he was, getting at sort of the hospitality of these places. But if we're being real, these places are not always hospitable to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that it grew on me. I think that there is a poetry to the title that that I certainly can't take credit for, but it's a phrase that if you're going to the hardware store and you're looking in the aisle of signage and you see you can buy an exit sign, you can buy a fire escape sign, you can buy a thank you, please come again sign. When you check out at the pump and run your credit card, shortly after Dave said, I think we should name this book, Thank You, Please Come Again. I did that and I ran my credit card and then it said, thank you, please come again. And so as I was turning it over in my head, it did just sort of become this phrase that you see in these spaces. It's something I still wrestle with. These spaces have a very complicated history, and it's not all history. The book that I made, I think there are 75 places featured in this book, 75 businesses featured in this book. And literally anyone else in the audience, if you set out to make this book, you would feature different places. There would be some overlap, but you would feel comfortable going into different places. You would be received differently in places. I did set out very intentionally to try to make a book that was representative of a diverse South. So I went into a lot of places of business in communities that were not my own. And, sometimes you can go into one of these spaces and you can feel the energy that, you're putting people are made nervous by your presence. And so, there are certainly some places that I visited that are not featured in this book. Because, the move I felt at that point in time was to buy a cup of coffee and hit the road. It was not, sometimes it was not worth it. Especially in communities, again, that are not my own. So it was really a dance, trying to feature a broad South, a diverse South, a changing South, and to also be sensitive to, the wants and needs of these communities and the people within them.
So if you don't mind, we're going to work with this word evolution.
Yeah.
So starting with your friend. So what is the correct pronunciation of his first and last name?
Kiese Lehman. Yes.
Kiese Lehman, who grew up in Mississippi. So if you have not read the essay, it speaks about his experience with his grandmother and his grandmother's boyfriend. And his grandmother's boyfriend is Ophidy. Ophidy. So I'm going to read an excerpt from his essay. So he would travel with his grandmother and her boyfriend to.
Yes, his grandmother, I think if he was here with us, he would say that his grandmother she recently passed, was the most important person in his life. And he didn't grow up living with her, but he grew up living with her a lot of the time in Forest, Mississippi, which is a somewhat rural part of the state.
Right. And he says that the service station was his favorite place to eat when he would go out on dates with his grandmother and her boyfriend.
OFD.
Yes. I love that we would get batteries and gizzards. I love that we could get biscuits and super glue. I love that we could get dishwashing soap, which was also bubble bath, which was also the soap we used to wash grandma's Impala, and the good hot sauce in the same aisle. I was 8 years old. I never knew or cared that my favorite restaurant served gas. My grandmama and Ofidi were deep into their 50s. They seemed to never know or care that our favorite restaurant served gas.
What do you think?
To be honest with you, the first time I read this, I thought, oh, so these are the spaces that I see driving up and down I-75 going to Mobile, going to Africatown, going to Selma, going to Montgomery, just driving over to Tuskegee. But this is, when you read this, it's a powerful love story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That you find at a gas station that serves food.
I mean, a lot of the places that I visited, so the place that Kiese is talking about is the Junior Food Mart. And there are a lot of junior food marts. These are gas stations, these are restaurants, these are grocery stores. This is, where you buy your over-the-counter drugs. This is where you buy your fishing supplies. This is the commercial enterprise in your town. I think about a place in tiny Banner, Mississippi, Pop's Food Mart. And when I stopped in Pop's, the owner, he pointed over to a round table with a lazy Susan in the middle, and there were 4 guys drinking coffee. And he said, he introduced them as the 2 o'clock crowd. And he said, you see that guy over there? He worked for UPS his whole career, and he retired last year. And that man eats breakfast, lunch, and dinner at this gas station every day. He said every piece of food that goes into that man's body comes from this gas station.
Wow.
I mean, these are the literal lifelines of some of these communities.
Yes.
And, he's there with his friends or acquaintances or community. This is, that the people are feeding him, the food is feeding him. You watch some of these places disappear, and you hope that these are the third spaces that people talk about in these small communities. And I think that was what Kiese was getting about in the what you call love story. I love that.
The love story of his grandma hanging out with your grandmother and her boyfriend, who dressed in camouflage. She said before camouflage was popular. So let's stay on community for a moment here. So you witness in how many years of the past, in the
10,
making?
on and off 10. Yeah.
On and off 10 years. So in this witnessing of the feed and fuel spaces in the South, I want you to, if you would, to talk about, and if you would please engage in the visuals as we continue this conversation. What about the people In terms of, were you intentional? You are a visual journalist. Were you using special lighting, or was this natural light? Because when you look at your work, you actually see their eyes, you see their personalities, you see the emotions. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, most of these places, including Maddox Grocery in Mississippi, I'm showing up unannounced. And, I'm trying my best not to disrupt the everyday goings on of this place. I'm not naive to think that my presence doesn't affect the goings on of this place. But I'm traveling lightly, and I'm trying not to take up much space, in every sense of the word. And so, I'm starting with talking to usually the person behind the register. And if I can get buy-in from that person, it's sort of like a game of telephone. It sort of trickles around. And, the people who are passing through, they're on their way somewhere else. It's hard to make, documentary style candid images of the interiors of some of these places, because it's important to me in this type of work to have buy-in from the people who are featured. And it's hard to have that opportunity when it's such a fluid situation. And so you see a lot of portraits in the book. You see some candids, but by the very nature of the project, that was a little bit more difficult. This is Miss Shirley in South Carolina. Most of it, including this, is natural light. Gas station light is not always beautiful light, but
This is beautiful.
You do what you can.
Yeah.
You leverage, window light as you can. There's a little bit of fill flash in some photographs, but not many. And yeah, I just tried to travel with a small footprint. And also I was, especially as the book deadline loomed, I was moving quickly. I had come up with this sort of framework that it was essential that I, visit these states and visit these types of places. So toward the end, I was like flying to Florida to go to a gas station. And, it was more strategic than just kind of wandering around.
So when you were able to, obviously it was a plus for you to have a small footprint. And so if I can, now every time I ask a question, I'm going to think about what Eduardo said. Oh my gosh.
All he was trying to tell me was that you're brilliant.
No. But let's talk about what I also appreciate about your work. You were intentional to travel with, small footprint. So that allowed you to step in spaces, community spaces, personal spaces of Southerners, whether they were generations old Southerners, whether they were Black Southerners, white Southerners, now immigrant Southerners. Can you talk more about that and what that allowed you to do in terms of having that small footprint and just being able to get up close and personal?
Yeah. At the end of the day, this is not a book about gas. It's not really a book about food. It's not a book about gas stations. It's a book about people. There are so few spaces. We live in this time where everything is increasingly polarized, especially now. And we self-segregate by way of our interests and our politics and our religion and our wealth or lack thereof. And what struck me and continues to strike me about these places is that they are, little d democratic spaces that we all continue to pass through, regardless of our background, socioeconomic status, and who we voted for president, on an almost daily basis. And we, open that little glass door and we hear that bell jingle, and there's this sort of mystery about what's inside. But if we're lucky, there's hot food and a place to sit down, and we hold the door for each other, and we pass the ketchup, and we share community. We old, young, white, black, Indian, Chinese. It cuts through the entire population of the South. And so my goal with the book really was to showcase the South in a way that is not monolithic, that we are a region that is diverse and dynamic and evolving. We're not, I think a lot of times people conflate the rhetoric of our political leaders with, what we all think in the South. And I hope that this book and this work and this exhibit pushes back against that notion and really holds up how the South is changing.
So speaking of that, so let's deal with the word red. Can we go there? So red for the state of Alabama, for Mississippi, means neoconservative and oftentimes anti for certain people, for certain classes. But did you find that the red political meaning in these spaces, or was it more global, so to speak, if that makes sense to you? And did it become more intercultural?
With a few exceptions, I found most of these spaces to be visually apolitical. We are political people, and so I think they are all political in some ways. But they are also businesses that want you to patron. They want just about everyone to patron them. I will say the one exception to that was when I was traveling in the Panhandle of Florida, which I was talking with Alan and Emily the other day about what is the South, and I would argue that while South Florida is not very southern, the Panhandle of Florida is deep South. And in the Panhandle, there were a lot of gas stations that were very overtly political. It was coming upon an election year, and I just found that to be sort of an anomaly compared to the other regions of the South that I'd visited, where most had an emphasis on welcoming all, I would say. Now red, whew, there's a well, where's Christy? We were just talking about at the student exhibit. There was a lot of red, and I think there is a lot of red in my work, certainly in this body of work, and it's dramatic. It does have a long storied history. It means a lot of things to a lot of people.
So within the context of food, how food brings everyone together, can we say that this is what the gas stations and this regional or locale culinary delight, is that what is happening? There are communities being created inside communities, which add to the broader community, which...
I think so, yeah. I mean, a large part of my academic background is in studying the foodways of the South and the ways that you can tell a story about this region by way of the dinner table. What's on it, who's at it, who's not at it, what people are talking about. And I do think that that's a powerful sort of entry point for conversation. There are also definitely a lot of sort of subcultures within it. One thing that comes to mind is there is a robust subculture of what they call trucker TikTok. Are you familiar with this?
No, please share. Trucker TikTok.
Trucker TikTok.
Okay.
Apparently, if you want to know like where to eat off a highway exit, trucker TikTok is the ticket. And I met a number of truckers or trucker adjacent folks who they, that's their guide. And they would travel from far away to seek out, the first place I heard of it was at this gas station that's owned by a Senegalese family in Greensboro, North Carolina, and serving Senegalese food. And so I sat down next to this guy who had driven over from Durham, and he'd heard about it on Trucker TikTok, and he was sitting, in front of a big bowl of spicy okra stew and jollof rice. And anyway, there are a lot of ways into that conversation, but yeah, I'm still. Someone needs to write the master's thesis on trucker TikTok. It will not be me, but maybe one of your students.
Perhaps maybe Estella. Yeah, right. So one last question before we go to the audience. From your lens, tell us and describe, if you will, what your work, your current work, and intersecting it with this work. How do you see, especially now at this moment, for the lives of, when we think about the interconnectedness of rural, urban, cultural, ethnicity, of the work for the students out, this intergenerational compass, and as well as many students, photography students out their work. They need accommodations, mental and emotional accommodations. And then we see the work of some of the students who are traditional or continuing education learners from Ali.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What, from your lens, what does this represent for the human condition? And what does this allow us to do?
That's a big one. I think when you look at the work that's hanging in the hallway, not mine, but that from the students and Ollie and Braveheart here in this community, they've really honed in on a portrait of Auburn at work. It's a diverse population, and yet, I think the work that I'm trying to do to counterbalance the journalism work is to highlight, some of these great commonalities that we share, whether that, is a space or a conversation or a food. We are a diverse people with leanings all over the map. But where are these spaces that we come together to find joy? And especially in such a political time when I don't want to get too political, but when we see some of these deportations happening and what are these commonalities? Where are we the same? Where are we united? And so I want to continue forward trying to find ways to highlight that.
We look forward to your work.
Thank you, Joan.
Thank you.
I appreciate you.
So I think I saw Chris, so please, we're going at this moment, if you have any questions, and I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Brooke is, yes.
Thank you, Brooke.
So I know you said it wasn't about the food, but we want to know what was the best food you had out of those?
That's not a fair question.
Okay, best chicken. Best chicken.
Best chicken. Okay, so the question is, what was the best food? I will start by saying that I tried food from every location that I documented, and I would go back and eat at all of those places. There were certainly some highlights. I was just talking about the spicy okra stew and jollof rice at the Senegalese gas station in North Carolina. On the wall outside is a picture of a Cajun garlic fried shrimp banh mi from Banh Mi Boys in Louisiana, where Peter Nguyen, grew up in a Vietnamese family in East New Orleans, and he binge watched the Food Network after high school and taught himself how to cook. And now he marries the traditions of his Vietnamese upbringing with, the Cajun flavors of New Orleans, in the back of his dad's Texaco station. And it's outstanding. There's a great place in the Mississippi Delta called Fertizzi's that I've documented a bunch of times over the last 10 years. It's run by an Italian immigrant family. It was opened in 1941. And it's a, grocery store, gas station, deli, some of the finest meats and cheeses, and also, ammunition, live bait, all the stuff, fresh produce. But he's also, house curing meats in the back of the beer cooler. You just don't find that. He makes a fried olive po' boy, again, marrying the traditions of his Italian roots with, close to Louisiana po' boy tradition. So it kind of goes on and on. So many boiled peanuts, a lot of fried chicken. I know it was a hard go. Somebody had to do it. Thank you for that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Two questions, if I may. First one, simple one. Were you using digital or film for your images?
So because of the nature of my journalism work, right now I shoot all digital.
Second question, you mentioned how the new immigrants are moving into these communities and taking over these establishments. Does the community also embrace them?
Sorry, I missed the beginning of that question.
Right. You mentioned how the new immigrants to the United States are moving into these communities and taking over these businesses that have been established for some time. Does the community also welcome them into it and embrace them?
Okay. Yeah. So some of the places these first generation American immigrants are moving into are taking over businesses, buying businesses that are long established, and sometimes, like in the case of Peter Nguyen, it's a somewhat new business. So it varies. I found that most of the immigrant foodways were happening in more urban areas. The New Orleans of the South, the Triangle in North Carolina where I live, Atlanta, Nashville. If you are a gas station trying to make it in rural Alabama, you can't be serving Senegalese food. You got to be serving burgers and tenders, and you have to serve food that is inexpensive, hot, portable, universally liked. That's it. And so, it was more of an urban phenomena to, find, lunch counters that have been transformed into taquerias, for instance. But you see that a lot in the cities for sure. And a lot of them are thriving. Banh Mi Boys that I was just talking about is now franchised, and I think there are 4 locations around the South. These are spaces that are somewhat low barrier to entry to try out your restaurant concept. And I think a lot of them are finding success. Yeah, thank you.
You have a lot of people in your pictures. I assume you ask them if you can take their picture, and then how long does it take them to relax where you can get a natural pose rather than a post pose?
Sometimes that never happens. But I think because of the nature of my journalism work, I am often going into people's homes or environments and meeting them for the first time, often in delicate situations, and trying to build that trust, trying to build rapport enough to make what I feel and hopefully they feel is an honest portrait or image of them. And so I love photographing people. I have very little interest in photographs that don't have people in them. Often I will be attracted to a scene and want to make a photograph of it, and I will set myself up for it, frame it out, and wait for the people. Because at the end of the day, that's what this project is about. It's about the people, it's the culture. And so in this project especially, it was important to me to have buy-in from all these people. And, sometimes that was having a lengthy conversation with them about my goals. And other times that was, a head nod from across the way. So, it's sort of varied. You just kind of feel it out. And when somebody doesn't want to be involved. But yeah, I mean, this is different than news work. And I, did try to be very sensitive to the wants and desires of the people who are, for the most part, just trying to buy gas or coffee or whatever and move along. I did a sort of a side project within this project for a while where I was setting up a makeshift photo studio on the sides of gas stations and making portraits of people who were patroning the stores. And that was kind of an interesting experience. Again, these people are, for the most part, like trying to move in and out real quick. And here I am, like trying to do a whole Olin Mills situation with them. And a lot of them were very generous about it. But I mean, I think I'll never forget this one man. He was a mechanic at one of these gas stations. And he told me after, we spent 10 minutes together trying to make these portraits. And he shook my hand and he said, I haven't had my picture made in 30 years. And I thought about that a lot. Like we all have our pictures made every day because we carry cameras around with us everywhere we go. But I think he was thinking, he was an older African American gentleman. And I think he was thinking about that sort of that Olin Mills, that studio. Yes. That studio portrait that you sit for, that is esteemed and important. I don't, that doesn't really answer your question, but anyway, I think about him a lot.
Can see why.
Yeah.
I think, did you have a question? Yes. And I think that has to be our last question. Yes.
First of all, you're fantastic, and your heart behind this is beautiful. I'm so inspired. And I just wanted to ask, I know you've met like a ton of characters over the course of 10 years of doing this. Who's a character that for you personally resonated? Not who you think the audience would like really enjoy hearing about, but who's someone that you will forever carry with you?
Well, that mechanic, for one. There are a number of people who are featured in the book who I've been able to visit again and again, and I've become kind of close with. And one of them, she's been up here before. She's hanging out on the wall. Her name is Miss Betty. And Miss Betty runs Betty's Place in Indianola. And Indianola is a town in the Mississippi Delta that was a real hotbed of white supremacy in the civil rights movement. It was the birthplace of the White Citizens Council. And so Miss Betty grew up as an African American in Indianola, and she started cooking. She also, of note, from Indianola is it's the birthplace of B.B. King. And so Miss Betty started cooking and became quite good at it, and then eventually started cooking for B.B. King, and eventually decided to open up a restaurant. And so she was looking around for places to open her business, and she saw this gas station on Main Street, and it was the old Ways Chevron. And she'd never been in it because growing up, that part of Main Street was the white side of town. And so she and her family weren't allowed to go in it. They had to drive out to the highway to get their gas. And so, I think about Miss Betty a lot, who, 40 years later, has honed her craft and built her wealth enough to not only buy the Ways Chevron and build her business there, But now she's on her third expansion.
Wow. Wow.
She's 2 blocks from the BB King Museum. She cooks soul food. And she's 2 blocks from the BB King Museum. And so, not only does she serve food to Black Indianola, but she serves food to white Indianola, and she serves food to, all of the European tourists who are traveling through. And she talks about this place that, had been, that she was not allowed to go into as a child, as now it's hers, and she is damn committed to it being welcoming to everyone who comes through her town. And so I think about Miss Betty a lot. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you. Listen, before you clap.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the conversation will continue. Please join us momentarily in the cafe where Kate will be signing books, but you can engage her more in a conversation. And thank you for sharing your heart and allowing us to see humanity through the lens of your heart. We thank you.
I appreciate y'all for bringing me here.